Good afternoon. I was going to say morning then, but it might be morning for some of you. So good morning or afternoon, wherever you are. Welcome to today's quick live broadcast, where we're going to be looking at the color balance tool and color grading. So that's the idea behind today's transmission. Before we get to that, let's just bring up my screen and myself. This is what we're going to be looking at today, a few shots that you can see on the screen and one on the right hand side as well. What we're going to be looking at is using the color balance tool in a couple of different ways for color correction and also a creative color grade as well. Before we get to that, what we'd love to know is that we're going to throw up a poll on screen on the moment, so it can just load up as and when my colleague pops it up. On Wednesday, we're going to do another quick live, so we'd actually love to know what you'd like to see. So we've done quite a few variations of different photos recently, but what we'd like to know is, do you want to see architecture or wildlife? So that's the two choices we have for Wednesday. Apologies if you're watching on YouTube and it's not streaming too great. I think the internet is busy on a Friday afternoon, so we'll do our best and make sure it can get through okay. So hopefully it will stabilize and figure out as well. The stream size has just turned down a little bit as well, just to cope with that as well. So hopefully it will settle. All right. Okay, so the poll will go up on screen shortly. So I think bandwidth wise, it's actually looking a little bit better now from my screen. So we should be all right. Okay, so what are we going to look at first of all? We're going to look at this guy, the color balance tool. I'm going to bring it out and make it a little bit larger. It's a super simple tool to use. Doesn't require any scientific knowledge or any of those kinds of things. It's just a real simple what you see is what you get interface. Now, perhaps the best way to demonstrate how this works is just with a quick nerdy color chart. So the way the color balance tool is divided is split up into shadows, midtones, and highlights, like so. Now on this gradated scale, if that's even a word, you can see we've just got shadow going through to highlights. So how does the color balance tool work? Well, we have a color wheel for the shadows, midtones, and highlights. There's a master as well, but we'll come back to that. And essentially you pick up the little point in the middle and drag it towards the color tone that you want to tint. And you can see the shadows only affects this end of the tonal range. Midtones, let's just go to opposite colors, and highlights like so. So you can see it targets those three different areas of tonal range. Now this kind of control you see quite common in programs that do video color grading, for example, but there's no reason why we can't use it nicely in still photography as well. So that's really all there is to it. Obviously we need to apply this in a practical way, but it's a very simple tool to use. Now on the side there are some sliders on the right, and those just control density, so they can brighten or darken those two different zones. So in summary, shadows, midtones, highlights just affects those particular areas, and wherever you drag the little circle applies that tint to the shot. So let's try and use this in a couple of different ways. So I'm going to go back to our original shot, and the first thing we're going to use it for is like a minor color correction tweak. So let's just hide me for a second and get the browser out the way. Now if we look at this shot, it's got a few adjustments on, nothing major, a little bit of contrast change. Really that's it. It's kind of one of those shots that just looks nice out of camera. But if we look kind of in the background, you see we've got cool tones in the mountains. So I'm kind of looking in these shadow areas. In fact, let's just stick a little color readout like so. We can just tap a couple. So you can see it's biased towards the blue a little bit wherever we kind of put this guy. So let's drop it over there. Now, of course, if we wanted to warm that up a bit, we could have a couple of different choices. I could, for example, bring up the Kelvin slider But to be honest, that affects the whole shot, and it's now making the skin tones too warm and so on. So I don't want to do that. So let's double click and reset that. But if I just wanted to neutralize the shadows a little bit, right now they're too blue, they're too cold. So in our shadow wheel, let's make this bigger so it's easier for you guys to see. In our shadow wheel, oops, we don't need that one. Let's get rid of you. In our shadow wheel, we can just go to the opposite of blue, which is kind of in the warmer tones. And then now our kind of blue level has reduced. Now, depending how far we want to go with that, we could really neutralize it, or we could just take the edge off it to something like that. So it just balances it a small amount, but we've still got some of the nuance there. So if I alt click my reset button, you can see before and after, like so. So just taking that coolness out. So it's not only, as you're going to see, it's a good tool for creative color grading. It's also good for just correcting those minor shifts in color that you might see in the shadows, midtones, and highlights. So one simple application. Let me just see if there's any questions. Seems that our streaming has stabilized now, so that's good. JD said, how did I do the color scale or numbers? It's actually a cursor tool. So if we go up here, you can find all the different pickers that you want to have. And this one was add a color readout, like so, or X on your keyboard. And if I want to move it around, I can do so, or I can alt click to delete it, like so. So it's not something I use a great deal, but it's quite handy just for picking it up. Let's have a look. MFG said, I think you could choose a flatter preset in the white balance. As I said, we could change the white balance preset, but that's going to affect the whole image. The beauty of the color balance tool is that we can, determine where we want to kind of push our colors around. All right, and Barry, we've answered. You had the same question, or was that the other Barry? I can't remember. Anyway, let's have a look. Okay, perfect. Let's move on to kind of doing it a bit more creatively. And what we're going to do is incorporate it into layers. So let's grab this shot as well. I think I'd messed around with it earlier. You can see we've got a layer here called color grade, and this is the edited shot, but without any specific color grading. So let's see how we can do that. Now, what we could do, of course, is forget layers, and we could go to our color balance tool, and we could move these around, and then we could play with the kind of tones that we want to have. And then, as I said, it's not scientific at all. It's just literally what you see is what you get. Calibrated monitor helps, of course. So we can just tweak our color balance tool like that, hold down our Alt key and see before and after. But what I like to do is put it on a layer because it gives us a bit more control. We can dial in some other corrections or adjustments too, and then have that as our color grading layer. So let's reset that, and we're going to make a new filled layer like so. Now a filled layer, let's just call this color grade, like so. Now a filled layer is pretty much like an adjustment layer, so it's going to affect the whole photo. So if I press M on my keyboard, then you'll see the mask is representing where our adjustment is going to be. So that's over the whole shot. So let's press M again to hide that. And I'll do a similar thing as before. So let's say we're just going to have some cooler shadows. Let's warm up our midtones and maybe our highlights just to a lesser extent, a bit as well. And also I'd like to drop the saturation down so it's more kind of muted tones like so. Now, the benefit of doing it this way is that we've got a combination of the color balance tool, and we've also dropped the saturation down a bit as well. So that's those two things working in play together. We could go further. I could grab my color editor, for example. Let's just go basic, grab my picker here and say, I want to just maybe turn the greens down a bit. So if I click and hold with my mouse, then if I move my cursor downwards, then we can change the saturation just in the greens, or I could make it more saturated like so. If I alt click, then we can change the hue a little bit as well. So let's just drop that down slightly as well. So now we've got a combination of different adjustments working together. Now the nice thing is, and Mega T, that's a great name, has a really good tip which I'll put on screen in a second, is that now we can moderate how much of this color grade we want. So if I think it's a bit too much, we can go anything from 0, so that's no grading, all the way to the max, or I could settle somewhere in between. Now Mega T's great little tip, let's put it on screen, says, let's just move it down a bit, I would suggest setting the opacity of that layer to 70% at the start, so then you can go either way. So what Mega T's suggestion was when we make our filled layer and before we do our color grading is to start at 70. And then that way you can say, well, actually I want a bit more or a bit less. So 70 is a good place to start. So well done for suggesting that. Okay, let's have a look at a couple of other questions. How's color grading different than saturation? That was Adnan that was asking. That came via my colleague Christine, so I can't find it to put it up on screen. The difference between, well, color grading is like an overall color look. So that's putting a grade on it, as we say. So we've affected the shadows, midtones, highlights, and the saturation and a color edit. So that's kind of put all those things in combination. Saturation is really just fixing or changing the saturation to be less or more, for example. There's great resources on color grading, especially for motion and for TV. So there's really good blogs and all kinds of documentation on different looks that were achieved in different movie productions and so on. And they're really good to draw inspiration from. Okay, let's have a look and just check a few other questions. Otherwise, we shall have a look. Sarah says, OMG, I like that. The click and hold to reduce saturation is amazing. Glad that was useful for you. Fantastic. All right, let's try another example. So we're going to go to this one. So this has already had quite a few edits on it, one I prepared earlier. So just to look at the layers, we've got a radial just for some vignetting, and then we've got a little bit of brightening going on in the shop interior, just so we can see what's going on here. So let's do a similar thing again. We'll start with our filled layer, like so. Click and hold, new filled layer, and we call this CG for color grade, if you like. Let's do C grade. And again, a similar thing, how do we want this to look? And again, the nice thing about putting it on a layer, if you decide you've made a terrible job, then you can just turn it off and on, delete it and start again without having to undo a bunch of other stuff. So what should we do with this one? Again, I think I'd like some more muted tones so we can bring saturation down. Go over to our color balance tool. And as I said, this is one of the tools we can make a bit bigger, so that helps. Let's have a look. We're going to go to, let's say, hang on, need to see the photo a bit more. So what if we had kind of, let's go for warmer tones in this respect. And then in our midtones, I might just go warmer overall. Maybe we can have slightly colder highlights like so. Now there's also a master tab, which is kind of just like putting a filter in front of your lens. So a colored filter. So if we drastically push this in either direction, so that can put an overall tint to the shot, but it's over the whole image. So it's good for just chucking a color grade in that affects everything. So I might just overall boost everything a bit as well. So we've got our shadows, midtones and highlights. And if you want to, you can see them separately as well, just so they're a bit easier to manage. So if you're working on a small screen and you can't necessarily have the space to float the tool out, you can look at them separately as well, or in the three-way view like so. Now on my color grade, I'm also going to desaturate a bit more, and let's also throw in a bit of a color edit. We go advanced this time, grab my color picker. I just want to tone down just the paintwork here a little bit, so it's kind of a tealy color almost. So I just want to mute that slightly as well, so I'm kind of a bit more monotone. And once again, like Mega T said, I didn't follow their advice, but we can always go back from no grading to full grading like so. So it's really a simple tool to use and very much enjoyable as well. As I said, you don't need any color mixing knowledge. There's no RGB numbers involved or any of that kind of stuff. It's just what you see is what you get. So traditionally, the way to color grade would be to use curves, different channels in the curves for just affecting, various areas and so on. But then the problem with using curves is that you can't separate luminosity from color. So it's always intermingled, unfortunately. Also, if you want to create certain colors, you have to know how to mix red, green and blue together, which I don't. Unfortunately. So the nice thing about the color balance tool is that you can see it exactly as it is. Now, one last tip, if any of you kind of work across video editors and also still image editors, there's two ways that you can look at the wheels. Now, standard is kind of how we've always orientated it in Capture One. Now, if you're used to using like DaVinci, for example, or other grading applications, if you click Vector Scope, it rotates everything 90 degrees, I think, or 180 degrees, which is the layout you expect to see if you're used to video editing apps. So in that preference, you can always switch that if you're having to turn your head on the side every time you use Capture One. Cool, let's have a look at a few last questions and then we can continue on our Friday. Apart from highlights and shadows, this was Luca who was asking. See if I can find your comment, Luca. Here we go. Let's add that. Apart from highlights and shadows, how different is color grading compared to white balance? Well, you've kind of hit the nail on the head, really, is that white balance will affect the whole photo, whereas the color grading will affect those individual tones. And also we can control the density as well. So if I wanted to lift my shadows or darken them, and I'll do drastic changes so you can see, that's also part of the ability of the color balance tool. So what I would suggest is white balance you kind of set to be correct for the photo, and then the color balance tool is like a separate adjustment that you can do to color grade if you wish. Of course, you don't have to color grade every single image that comes in, but it's a really nice thing to experiment with. And of course, if you've made a color grade that you particularly like, you can also save it as a preset, so you can always return to it. Let's see. Jason's saying, I hope we can see more about product photography. Yeah, we could do some product editing. That's also a really nice idea, definitely. And Mega T, the most helpful person we have here. What does smoothness do in the advanced color editor? That's a good question, actually. And seeing as we use the advanced color editor, let's answer that. So you see around the outside of our color range selection. So if we turn this on, we can see exactly which colors we have selected. That's how it rolls off into the neighboring colors. So it's either a hard stop where that color selection is, or we have a nice smooth roll off into the neighboring colors and it stops posterization. So this isn't probably the best example, but on a few color editor tutorials you can see it. If we had like a really hard smoothness and we change this, so let's change our smoothness. So you can see here we get a hard edge around that paintwork, whereas now we bleed into those neighboring colors much better. So you can see it here as well. We've got like posterization or a hard edge going on, and smoothness will just roll it off nicely into those other areas like so. So hope that satisfies your explanation. What are the curved lines on each side of the color wheel? So with the color wheels, I use them just by dragging the balls around like so. Now, if you want to, let's say you settle on your ideal color grade. If you grab this one, that will just move it in and out from the outside to the center. So it will kind of stick on that color, and then that's the way just to moderate the strength. And then this one, you can actually move it around like so as well. If you've got a scrolling mouse or a trackpad, you can use 2-finger scroll if you change your preference in Capture One. So if you prefer to have, where is it, scroll wheel changes slider value, this should change it and like so. So if I'm in the center here and I scroll, then we can actually move it around with the trackpad as well. So there's a few different ways that you can manipulate the tool as well. So it works really nice. Okay, just checking questions, and then we'll give you a few other links to talk about. John says, never understood smoothness until now. That's good. I mean, it's easy to confuse with like making the color smooth, but it's always relates to the selection. So those, you know, sliders at the top here, this one here, sorry, I guess the wheel and the top slider relates to the selection that you're creating, and the 3 under it is then the adjustment. So that's the best way to differentiate those, of course. Excellent. Oh, hi Neil, nice to see you. Good buddy of mine from way back, so good to see you, Neil. Great photographer is Neil, you should check him out. And last but not least, let's see what Becky had to say. I'm struggling matching skin tones from image to image. Probably best advice for that. Don't have the right images, but of course don't forget you can queue up more than one shot into the viewer, like so, 1, 2, 3, 4, or more than that. And then what you can do is also in the color editor tool itself, you've got the skin tone picker. So you can pick on your subject's skin tone, and then you can use hue, saturation, lightness sliders just to fine tune that particular skin tone. So I'd work with 3 or 4 images up, and then you've got, you know, a comparison to work off as well. So hopefully that helps. Also check out, I think we did a live broadcast on skin tone. I can't actually remember. We've done so many of them now, but there's plenty of tutorials on editing skin as well. We did do one on skin tone last week or the week before. And we also talk about using the uniformity sliders in skin as well. How to normalize kind of, you know, differences in tone and that kind of stuff as well. Okay, so I think thanks for joining us today. So I hope that was another little useful tidbit on working with Capture One. Don't be afraid to use the color balance tool and the color editor tools. As I've shown you, it's super easy to use. Stick it on a layer just because it kind of gives you that get out of free jail card to always go back and edit. Use Mega T's great tip of starting at 70% because then you can go either way. That's really nice. And just having that additional flexibility really helps as well. Last little poll question that we want to ask you, which I can't remember what it was. Oh, that was it. After seeing this today, sorry if Christine, my colleague in the background, I can't remember if we said we were going to do this one. Have you used the color balance tool before? Yes, no, or no, but I'm going to try it now. That's what will be good to hear. Based on the poll, architecture seems to be winning. So I think that's probably what we're going to show on Wednesday as well. So we can look at like keystone correction, a few other bits as well. One of our ambassadors, Paul Reifer, is a great architecture photographer, so I might pinch an image or two of him to edit as well. So there we go. Thanks for joining us again today. And let us know in the comments as well what you found useful, and also what you're up to, and also if you're going to give color balance editing a try as well. This recording will be straight up onto Facebook and YouTube pretty quickly. So if you didn't get a chance to catch all of it, you can just rewind and take it all in. So thanks for joining us, and see you all again soon. Take care.